Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for coming to today's introductory webinar on our autumn training program, and specifically the movement building training program, which is going to be hosted by ourselves here at the Social Change Agency. This webinar is being recorded, so as I sort of said previously, feel free to have your cameras off, and we'll be looking just to record the sort of screen sharing and the words from myself. The webinar has been scheduled for up to 1 hour. It's likely we'll finish under the hour, but wanted to ensure we safeguard the hour just in case. But hopefully I'll give you some time back in your busy days, as I know everyone has a lot to do. And yeah, we'll just look to begin. So what we'll be going through today is the autumn training program, which we'll be running through over the next few months. So what we're going to cover today is the introduction to the session, which is what we're in now and what we're speaking about at the moment. We'll look to do a brief overview of the joint training program offer, which is available, provide some context and background context of who we are at the Social Change Agency, which many of you will have already seen through some of the previous workshops that we've held. Also, I know that not everyone was able to attend all of those, and there has been some changes as well. How this movement building program will work, how to sign up, the aims of the program. I will look to break down some of the content of each of the individual workshops as well. And then, we may have some time to take some questions at the end, but also there'll be always time to get in touch and ask questions if you need to. And the email addresses are on the sort of sign up forms that you've had already, but I'll share them again sort of in this session as well. So that is generally the introductions. Now, what you will have all seen already, hopefully, which has led you to during this webinar, is this flyer here for our autumn training program, or autumn program of learning, which is run in combination with ourselves here at the Social Change Agency and also Climate Outreach. We're not going to cover in detail the program that's on offer from Climate Outreach, as they have their introductory sessions, which we can see here on the dates of the 7th of October and also Wednesday, the 12th of October. And a note for the Climate Outreach introductory workshops and sessions, if you wanted to attend, you do not have to attend both of those on the Friday and the Wednesday. That just was to give an opportunity to have a choice between the two, as that one is more of an interactive introductory session. It was felt the recording wouldn't work as well. Therefore, the session is going to run twice. So if you can only make the Friday or you can only make the Wednesday, that's absolutely fine. And similarly with the Climate Outreach training program, if you cannot make any of those introductory workshop sessions, you will still be able to engage with the latter parts of their training program. And again, you would have seen this detail through already when you've had the flyers and you've had the PDFs on the email, so I won't go through it in too much detail. But obviously we have two separate programs here, one of which is our movement building, which is what we're looking to introduce today. And we're just going to be explaining through what the program would entail in a little bit more detail, just to give organizations and projects a better understanding as to whether this is something that would be useful, suitable, or applicable for their projects, and just give you an opportunity to see if it's something that you'd like to sign up for the full program, really. So it's just going into a bit more detail as to what's on the program and what we sent round. And Climate Outreach, as I said before, the workshops that they've designed sort of specifically for Climate Action Fund grant holders will begin on the 7th of October and run again on the 12th of October. So yeah, I would encourage you to sign up with for those sessions if you want to really look at effective engagement and communication on climate change. And they'll really look into how you can have those meaningful climate conversations from people from different backgrounds, look to break down the 7 British segments that Climate Outreach have done brilliant work to work to understand. So looking through the backbone conservatives, the progressive activists, disengaged battlers, and the various different sort of demographics, and there's the segmentations in that Climate Outreach have put together. So that will be a big element of the Climate Outreach training program. So if those things are of interest to yourselves and your projects moving forward, then yeah, I would definitely encourage you to sign up for at least one of their introductory workshops, so you can get a better understanding as to whether that program will also be useful for your organizations or projects too. But as I said, today we'll be looking to focus on the movement building training program, and like I say, just explaining that out in a little bit more detail. No worries for any late arrivals. And as I was just saying at the start, we're recording this as if it were webinars. There's quite a few people who aren't able to attend today, so we'll send out this recording to give them an opportunity to go through this as well. And yeah, we're really just outlining the training program to give projects an opportunity to see if it would be a useful opportunity for them to engage with the full program. But yes, if you have any more questions about the climate outreach program and their workshops, which begin on the 7th, then please do get in contact with David Powell at david.powell@climateoutreach.org. But those details are there on the flyer as well, which we sent round, and I'll share them again at the end of this webinar. But what we want to look at today is the movement building canvas, the training around the movement building canvas, and how that will be applied through this program of learning. So before I go into that in a bit more detail, give a little bit of background of who we are and what we do, although again, the majority of the cohort will have seen this in some regard through our interactions. But we are essentially, as it says here, look at the experts in creating social impact using communication, community organizing, crowdfunding, peer networks, innovation and systemic change. We work with a number of organizations sort of across the spectrum, from really small community groups to larger NGOs. We work with sort of many trusts and foundations similar to the National Lottery and the Climate Action Fund. We also work with other foundations such as Lloyd's and Comic Relief to provide similar-ish functions, working with groups, community groups, activist groups even, to help with the sort of movement building, influencing, communications, whatever it might be, to essentially help people create positive social change. And it really sort of builds into, or in other words, helping people build their movements. And we do that through consulting, program design, delivery, training, workshops, and much more. And we've been around not for an incredible amount of time, but we're sort of coming to 10 years in existence at the start of next year. And through that time, we've worked with a wide range of change makers, as I said, sort of from individual to those larger NGOs looking to create national or sometimes even global impact. But everything we do is centered around the concept of building a strong, sustainable movement. And that's what the general content of our training program is going to be designed around and emphasized on. So what do we mean by movement building? And again, we won't go into too much detail here around the definitions of movements in the background of movements in movement building, and we'll provide some of that in the first workshop session. But also we've spoken about this context previously, but it's always worth, before beginning any conversation or session on movement building, to think about what we mean by movements. You can have the sort of dictionary definition out there, which is a group of people who come together to advance an idea or coordinate activities that work towards a shared objective. Or sometimes a societal shift where people change the way they think and act. And there's a plethora of definitions out there. And when it comes to movement building, it often does depend on how you apply it. But we essentially define it as where grassroots individuals are connected to each other and acted towards the change they want to see in the world. And it's different from a campaign, which often has a finite end point. Campaigns can feed into a wider movement, but a movement in itself is different from a singular campaign. And there are similarities across all movements, from their identity, their journey, the things that enables those movements to grow. And what you'll see as you sort of go through the workshops, and you really start to go through the different elements of what builds a movement, how so many of the movements that you may see sort of not even necessarily follow that blueprint, but really sort of have those same elements to help that movement build, grow, and sustain itself. So this is, in essence, the movement building canvas in full, and this is what we'll look to go through during our workshops and during our autumn program of learning, which may also seep into the winter. And this is something that you may have seen before. It's on our flyer, and we've spoken about it briefly in previous workshop sessions. But you see on the outside there, we have your people and impact, which is something we were able to explore in a bit more detail in May. And I know that in fact, a good few, if not most of you here today, were in that session in May as well. So that's sort of the initial elements of the movement building canvas there. And then we really look to go into the movement identity, the movement journey, and the movement enablers, which is, the identity is sort of the founding principles of your movement, the journey around what happens once people join, and the enablers around what enables your movement. How does it sustain? How do you organize? How do you communicate and connect to the movement? Determine the infrastructure and resources to get going and stay moving. And these are the things that we'll look to cover in much more detail throughout the training program. So the question is, how will the training program itself work? So we will run a session every sort of 2, 3, or 4 weeks, depending on final feedback and survey results. So we are looking to hold the survey for another few days to allow those to view the recording, to have that final input there. But there was a bit of a range from the initial responses around what would be most suitable in regard to frequency. So that's what we'll look to determine that and run that every sort of 2, 3, or 4 weeks. And as I sort of said in the flyer and the other information we sent out, is that we will look to run this session again in the new year, to allow anyone who wasn't able to sort of join into these sessions would be able to get involved next time around. So it's not the only opportunity to be able to access this training and access this support. And then it would be required that you can commit to all 3 workshops, because we would look to sort of work through the different elements of the movement building canvas, and sort of how they all look to speak to each other. And it can become quite difficult if, for example, you were to miss the session within the middle, as that would be the session that really links through the first and the third sessions there. So if you were able to sign up to this program, ideally, really, we'll be looking at a commitment that you could sign up to all 3 of the workshops there. And as I sort of said there, as you look above, the frequency of these would mean that it's a relatively short training program period in which we sort of intensively go through the different elements of movement building. And it's just more beneficial for everybody, essentially, if you're able to commit to all 3 sessions, if possible. We'd look to ideally have 1 sign up per project, but we'd only limit it to 2, just to be able to somewhat manage numbers within the room. So that would be the general aim. However, there was feedback that people would potentially want other members of their teams or projects to be able to attend, which is why we'd suggested that a limit of 2, but also it may be that if you want multiple people to get involved and you do have an office space, if you were to join from 1 computer, then a number of you could happen to be in that room at the same time, which is absolutely fine as well. But just for the purposes of the interactiveness of the sessions and the communication between participants, it would be useful if there wasn't more than 2 accounts from a particular project logged into the program at any point. So that would be the aim. So yeah, still no necessity to only have 1 member of the project attend, but just to help manage numbers and be able to have that right level of interaction. We will send out a physical movement building canvas as well to the lead contact, which again lends itself to not having multiple different people from different projects on the same sort of call. And this physical movement building canvas you'll be able to work through within each session. So by the end of that session, you will have in front of you a visual depiction of how you'll look to build your movements, different elements which your movement consists of, and you'll have that sort of in a physical form that you'll be able to sort of continue to adapt and work through. So that would be a key, and we'll get sort of addresses from the lead contacts. Will send it out in plenty of time to ensure that it's a really interactive type of program, but also that you have a genuine and clear output from that. And then we will be in touch shortly after the program ends to check progress, to see what steps have been made to help strengthen and further the movements based upon what we've been able to work through in our different sessions. And then looking in the new year, we'll all come together and reconvene for an alumni session in the spring of 23 to get further support and advice and feedback from, us, but not really necessarily us, from your peers, those you've been working through the program the end of this year, is that then when you reconvene in spring, you can trade tips on what worked, and share challenges of things that were more difficult, which elements of the canvas were harder to address and harder to fulfill, and being able to sort of share those with your peers within a few months of finishing that canvas, to then be able to take those next steps into next year, hopefully be beneficial for all members there as well. And it will also, this program will also give us an opportunity to feed into the National Lottery and their plans around the Climate Action Fund, where what support could be very useful for the cohort and for members to be able to strengthen their movements, and what role the lottery could play in enabling that too. So, these sessions will be hopefully useful for that as well. So that's a general sort of consensus of how this will work. But of course, this cannot cover everything. So please do, if you have additional questions, like I say, you could pop them in the chat, but email me anything across and I'll look to get right back to you. So when we look at what our aims are of this, I mean, we've sort of covered a lot of these already, but we really want to work with the cohort to better understand the local movements, enable them to grow these movements. Hopefully participants will be confident, can articulate who's in their movement and their movement's impact. We'll be able to confidently articulate their movement's identity, journey, and the things that enable those movements. Hopefully participants will end the programme with a clear understanding of their own movement ecology. So where the gaps may lie, what needs to be prioritised, and hopefully also participants will be able to engage with and learn from other participants and share their movement building journey. And as I sort of said before, participants will have their physical movement building canvas that they can continue to work through, adapt and apply into their own movements as well. So that's sort of what we hope to achieve out of this. And like I say, what I just said before, which we haven't put down in this slide, is the aim to then also be able to feed into the wider Climate Action Fund sort of priorities and what support may be available to really support and strengthen movement building sort of across the members and across the movement as a whole. So that's the general background and context of how this program will work and what we want to achieve with this program. And what we'll look to do now is have a look at the content that will fall under the program and what we'll look to do in each of these sessions. And it's quite a lot of me talking, but I would look to speed through them a little bit. And like I said, it's unlikely we'd stay here for the whole time until 2, it's just to make sure. And yeah, please do also get in touch with questions. But this will be the general breakdown of how this will work. We'll have the initial workshop really focusing on that identity, looking at the shared purpose, the clarity of purpose in terms of mission and impact, personal experiences that motivate people to join your movement, and the shared values, the qualities and beliefs that movement members will identify with. And we'll also briefly recap your people and your impact. There's generally, the majority of people will have been in our previous workshops and the workshop in May, where we really did look to break that down a bit further, but we will look to cover those elements again. And then we'll look at our journey within workshop 2, the journey of the movement and movement members, the purposeful engagement, the opportunities created for members to deepen their connections with each other and the cause, the meaningful action that movement members can take to mobilize and take tangible action. And then also the rewards and incentives, how we'll motivate and recognize their actions. And for workshop 3, we'll look at the enablers, the things in the background that often allow movements to happen. What are the structures that provide the right balance of control, leadership, power, and support from the center, communications, and how use of brand or digital and offline channels to inspire, connect, and support your movement. We'll look at CRM and data, and what data and insight is used, and how you store data, how you utilize data to create personal, meaningful journeys for your movement members, and sustainability, not necessarily sustainability in the terms that we would generally reference it within the climate movement, but in the sense of how would your movement be sustainable? You know, identifying the right model to resource your movement at startup and at long term, as you know, as simple as sort of the basic things like funding. You know, how will you have the money to sustain your movement? And then we'll also look in that final session around putting your canvas in action, next steps, and sort of program evaluation. And then, as I said before, we will have our alumni session in the spring of next year, which will sort of follow 2 to 3 months following the end of the program, and allow participants to really reflect on progress since the Movement Building Canvas program, refine their canvas, and interact with the participants on successes, challenges, peer support. And yeah, I've looked to have some follow-up questions there as well, and look to take these Movement Building canvases to the next step and really into implementation as well. So that would be the broad overview. But what I'll look to is just break down a bit more of the content of each workshop, so you get an idea of what it is that we'll be going into in full detail. If any of those had a brief overview of the Movement Building Canvas before, you know, some of these things we may have spoken about briefly, but we'll actually speak about in much more detail when we have our workshops, where we can really have sort of interaction with everybody who's attending. But the first workshop, as I've said before, will be focusing on movement identity. And the movement identity, well, actually, yeah, we'll focus on movement identity. But prior to that, again, as I'd said, we will be looking to recap that impact and also your people. And we covered this in the May workshop, but sort of the impact is around the unique impact your movement is going to make in the world, and sort of what difference it will make if successful, in sort of working to ensure that we can articulate that impact, so then we can encourage people to join the movement. You know, it's easier to do so if it's a clear, definable impact that your movement is going to have, and those that join the movement can clearly determine what the impact is as well. You know, and sometimes it can be quite complicated, and more complicated than we think. It sounds like it's a really easy thing to be able to articulate and apply, but it can often not be. So, you know, you want to really always ensure that, you know, the impact your movement can make can be articulated by people who are new to the movement, who've recently joined. You know, can you articulate clearly what it is the impact you're going to make? And, you know, similarly, before we go any further within movement building, you know, do you know who your people are? And again, we covered this a bit before, but sort of who are those people who form part of your movement? You know, these could be your supporters, your volunteer campaigners, you know, stakeholders, and more. But it's thinking about who is with you, and is, as we sort of move through the rest of the canvas, you know, you'll always sort of look to go back to your people and think about, have we included the right people, but also who isn't in our movement. You know, sometimes it's key to determine those who don't sit within our movement as well. And it doesn't necessarily have to be particular people, but it might be there's certain groups that aren't part of your movement, for whatever reason it might be. And again, it's important, I guess, to determine that quite early on. But again, these are things that we'll explore in more detail throughout the workshops. But as we really look into a shared identity, the movement identity, which is that first workshop, which we'll really look to focus on, we'll focus on 3 things in detail, which is shared values, shared purpose, and the shared experience. And these 3 things together will look to make up the identity of your movement. And what we'll do within these sessions is we'll break these down even further, and we'll sort of work through together to understand how these apply to your movements. But one of the first things to understand, similar to impact, but is that what change will your movement make in the world, and you know, what unique commitment to the cause will your movement members make? So it's having that real clarity of the social value of your movement, you know, having that shared purpose, whether that's your mission statement, or whether your movement has its own distinctive purpose, but it's a statement of what makes all the people you've identified greater than the sum of the parts when they act together. So that's really the key thing around there, you know, very similar to that impact your movement will make, but what is it that brings that impact together between your movement members? What is that shared purpose that has brought those people, the people that we identified beforehand, we will identify even more so, what is the shared purpose that drives them? Because that is one key element which makes up your movement identity. And similar to that, it's around the experiences. What experiences do movement members have in common? What's driven them to join your movement? And this is really about understanding the intrinsic drivers that motivate your movement members to join together and commit to your cause. So, there could be, as it says in the slide here, sometimes it could be direct, indirect experience issue that the movement is focused around. So, it may be that somebody is experiencing the difficulties that the movement is centered around, or a campaign within the movement is centered around, and therefore they've had that shared experience of it may be bad housing, for example. That shared experience of having bad housing may inspire them to join the housing movement, or one of the movements within the housing movement. So it's these things, and understanding those shared experiences of your movement members, again, is really, really key in building up that movement identity. So, it could be all sorts of different things, but like I say, it often could be a direct experience of the issue. It could be the shared experiences of fighting to change things, or a number of different things, essentially. But it's really about understanding what it might be, what it is that's brought people together there, and across that, what golden thread has that shared experience. Or maybe that different members of the movement have different shared experiences as well. And the other thing is around the shared values. What values and beliefs are forged through their experience. They might have been there already, but how are they reinforced? How are they reaffirmed? So what values and beliefs would your movement members identify with? And how would your movement members recognize these in each other? The values are essentially the things that your movement members hold dearest. They're often unspoken, but being part of that movement reinforces them. It creates opportunities to live them in practice. And as it says here on the slide, typically these would have been formed through shared experience, which would bring you to those shared values. And sort of those three things together, in a nutshell, is what we believe sort of forms that movement identity, the shared values, purpose, and experience. And again, this is probably the quickest of sort of done an overview of those three elements there, but that's what we're looking to really get into the detail of in more detail, and how that applies to your specific movements in workshop 1 as well. So that's really, in a nutshell, the movement identity. But the importance of the movement and having a clear identity cannot be understated at all. And one of the ways this is really articulated is how people use symbolism often, sometimes as well. People within a movement, as I said before, the importance on the values, sort of anything that movement members hold dearest. Think about some of these successful movements that have happened, or even within our climate, the climate realm, or the climate world in which we live. If we look at the Extinction Rebellion, for example, you have a very, very clear identifiable symbol, for people who feel that they're within or part of that movement. If they walk down the street and they see somebody with a backpack that has that symbol on and that sticker, immediately they'll have that connection and they have that identity, and they think, well, that person may hold shared values, shared experience, or shared purpose, and that's shown visually through that movement identity. So absolutely not the case to say that we think everybody should be having some clear symbol that can be then used to as a movement identity in that sense. But it's just an example as to how that strong movement identity can give people that shared purpose and reaffirm their shared values and shared experience. And that's one way you can. It's an example of how it's been sort of visually depicted. So as we move away from the shared values and the movement identity, because can't spend too much time on one, we'll move into workshop 2. And what we'll do in workshop 2 is really look to focus on the movement journey. And the movement journey is made up of, again, 3 key things that we look to explore further, which is meaningful action, the purpose of engagement, and the rewards and incentives. And we'll break these 3 things down a bit further now, and much further when we work with you on in the group workshops. The purposeful engagement is around what tangible opportunities will movement members have to share a meaningful experience of participating in your cause? And how will these things reinforce the movement's identity and make its members feel they're part of something bigger than themselves? So this is often about the opportunities that are created for members to sort of experience and deepen their shared commitment, both to each other, but also to the cause, and that's the key thing there as well, is sort of, whilst you need to have that purposeful engagement, the members of the movement to be able to engage with the cause, which is key, also need to have opportunities for movement members to engage with each other, to strengthen that identity that we've just spent all this time working through, in the previous sessions. So, how does that continue to be strengthened, and how do we ensure there is purposeful engagement? So, about the ways you already facilitate people to connect with the cause, or the ways in which they may do it independently. Is there any opportunities they have to be able to do this independently? So these are things to really to think about. Is there a beginning and an end to their journey? Is there a time when movement members sort of will no longer be present? So you have to be focused on what kind of engagement is really purposeful in the here and now as to when they are members of your movement, and really look to explore all of these in much more detail. But that's a key thing there for movement members, is purposeful engagement, which is similar to meaningful action. And as you work through and you actually go through the canvas yourselves, you'll start to see the differentiation between these two things. This is around, where is value created for members? What type of activity and actions will members be doing to create value for your cause? How can members give back to your movement to make it sustainable and to help it grow? So that's really, really one of the important things to look at, the opportunities movement members will have to take tangible action in support of your cause or the movement, whether say of their lifetime or in their lifespan that they have as being a member of your movement. And as we'll see in some of the examples in the slide, it could be campaigning or re-campaigning, holding an event, even just making a donation. For some movements, some campaigns, or some projects and organizations, having a clear route in which somebody can support financially makes a member feel they're taking a meaningful action, which is generally support of the cause. So these things, or it could be actual hands-on volunteering within the movement, but it's around the actions members can take now, and also what they could do in the future, but what they could take now to create change. So what makes them feel that I've done something that is a meaningful action that's helped further this cause. And these are, again, the things that help the journey for movement members, and when you consider these different things, hopefully it can help build or create a strong and more sustainable movement there. And the final thing we look at around movement is rewards and incentives, which sometimes can sound a bit like a bit of a tricky one, but it's around what tangible or intangible rewards would your movement members value? Is how can you motivate and recognize action and encourage people to move from one action to the next? So rewards can mean all sorts of things, not necessarily gifts or exclusive events, although you'll find that all over in change making, often to be able to go to an exclusive event or something like this. But it really could mean things around that, the learning new skills, peer recognition. It's often things around that, what would be offered to movement members from getting involved in your cause? You'll be able to strengthen your skills. You may have access to training, be able to have access to workshops, so it's really, really, really important to think about what it is that incentivizes those to continue to be part of your movement, because some of it will come from your movement identity, but you can't rely solely on the movement identity. It can sometimes not be enough to sort of rely on the fact that, well, these have got shared values, and there's a shared experience here, especially if you may be working with people who have lived experience of the issue you're looking to build a movement around. That just because there's a clear identity and they are driven because of their shared values, that you don't have to incentivize action or incentivize engagement with your movement. It's like saying incentivize and rewards and incentives can sound maybe different to what it is. It's not about necessarily just our monetary sort of aspects, but it can be around even just the being able to offer the incentivization, apologies, of being part of a community, in a sense of community. But even that being really clear can be important sometimes. So it's really important to just factor that in, and at least have that as your thought process, and maybe not take for granted that people will continue to be a part of your cause or a part of your movement simply because of the fact that you have shared values, and that therefore it'd be enough, or you have shared purpose, or that movement identity is strong, therefore people will continue to do things. You have to make sure that the action that you're offering is meaningful. You have to ensure that people can engage with the movement in a purposeful manner, and you do have to at least consider the incentive, what incentives people have to engage with your movement, in particular in your cause. So these three things, sort of really important from our perspective, at least, and to making up that movement journey. Because an identity is not enough on its own. You need to really sort of think about the journey that members in your movement will be going on, and that's something we could think about together as we have our workshops, later in the year. But again, very whistle-stop tour in a nutshell, quite a large nutshell that time, and that makes up our movement journey. So what we'll then look at in the third workshop is some of that stuff in the background, the movement enablers, what enables your movement, what keeps it sustainable, what's going to allow it to grow, what is the infrastructure behind it. Much of it's hidden, that the infrastructure behind a movement, and some of it's maybe more boring stuff, or some people that see it's more boring stuff, when you just want to be thinking about taking action, and making the improvements to your community that it is that you want to make. But it's also key to think about the enablers of your movement, and again, we've identified 4 key enablers in any movement there. And the first one we'd look at is CRM and data. And CRM can sometimes be a bit of the CRM is an acronym for Customer Relationship Manager, I believe. Anyway, I may have got it wrong. So again, it may be the terminology may not match up exactly with every movement. Really, it's just around the data you have of the people that are part of your movement. A CRM could be a very complex system, such as Salesforce or Microsoft CRM, but CRM is also can essentially be a spreadsheet that you have with data and of people who are part of your movement. So CRM is a technical term, but essentially it's around what data you have, but what kind of information about your movement members will help you understand them better. It might be that it's easier just to take the first and last name of your people who have come to volunteer at an event or something, in an email address, but is there actually more information about your movement members which will help you understand them better, which therefore means you'll be able to offer more meaningful action, purposeful engagement, you understand their identity and strengthen that movement. So is there information that's actually better to have, and is there some information that you don't need to have as well? What opportunities do you have to capture that information, such as volunteering opportunities, events that you may have, petitions you may have been signed, what opportunities do you have? And then also, on a more technical and granular level, what systems do you have which are able to store, analyze, and use that information to communicate with them? And these things will help you develop your customer relationship management systems and the use of that data. So, the more insight you can produce about movement members, motivations, behavior, the better equipped you'll be to have personalized, meaningful interactions with them. So, as I said in the slide here, it's worth thinking about all the touch points where you can capture information, but then also think about how you can use that information as well. So that's sort of around CRM and data, and probably the briefest stuff. I can cover about that in a very brief manner as well anyway. But these things are also really important to think about. And also, the data, how long you're going to capture it for, and what you're going to do with it when there's no longer an operational reason to be in touch, and all of these different things that do need to be thought about, I guess, when it comes to a sustainable movement. Communication as well, is really the thing that's going to really, really enable your movement, is effective and strategic sometimes communications, at least planned in some way, so what channels will you use to inform and grow, enable and organize your movement? Is that clear? Do you have a plan, a policy around how that works, how people engage, who manages the networks in which those conversations are conducted? How will you decide who gets what type of communication and when? Even if you have a very, very small movement currently, sometimes it can be harder to determine who gets what types of communications. And it might be that, yeah, well, we just send a WhatsApp out to everyone when there's something going on in the weekend that they can get involved in. That may work now. Will that work forever? So it's worth thinking about these things as well. Is there something that every communication will have in common? That helps you sort of identify that identity of the movement, your brand, essentially. So yeah, answer these questions will help you plan how to use digital and offline channels to connect, support, and scale your movement. And as I've just said there, reinforce that movement identity. So yeah, if you do have a core comms function within your organization, this will help you start thinking about how to embed movement thinking into communications strategies and plans. But even if you don't have a real clear core comms function within your projects, organizations, or teams, it's still worth just thinking about these things and having them in mind. These things could be applied in different ways. Some organizations we'll work with will have a person who can work on every single element of this canvas to ensure it's all cohesive and works together, and has the strong resourcing behind it. Obviously, some organizations you work with essentially one person, and they obviously that isn't feasible. So it doesn't matter as such that if about having a full comms team who can carry these through. Is the important thing, and one of the most important things initially is just to consider these principles when looking around building your movement, and ask yourself these questions. And often just by having that consideration, it makes a big difference at the very least as well. So communications is another one of those things that's quite key to think about, especially as your movement grows. And this communication has to be a bit more strategic, should I say. Another thing to think about is organizing. And there's a few different questions here that, organizing can mean many different things, but some key questions here. One of them is around the level of control will your organization require over movement members' actions, and why? So, and well, actually looking at the second question as well around, the movement support and enable members to self-organize and co-create. And, it depends whether that's applicable to your particular movement or not. But with the way some movements and sort of projects go is, anybody can sort of take an action representative of that movement, could utilize their logo, can self-organize a local litter pick under the banner of another project or organization. And that can be a really good way for the movement to grow organically, as people are able to sort of build local pockets themselves. But sometimes that can have potential issues as well, by having that clear autonomy. That means you maybe have a little bit less control over some of the other elements of the movement that we've just spoken about there as well. So there's levels to how much you allow self-organization within the movement and sort of members more widely. Again, it's important to think about these things as a movement starts to grow as well, and then if they are able to sort of take their own actions and then self-organize, how will that be supported by the main coordinators of the movement, or the network, and those things will really help you determine how the movement is structured and resourced. So as it says in the slide here, it's involving considering the balance of control, leadership and power, and the infrastructure and resources you can commit to providing. Because on the other hand, it's great saying people can self-organize and use our banners and logos, but then when they look to self-organize, can you give them resources that they actually need to be able to run an event as well? So thinking about these things holistically and all the different elements there is really, really important. But sort of as I said before at the start there, if you do really empower members to self-organize and co-create, then that can lead to organically that more authentic, genuine and scalable movements as well, which is really important there. And that last aspect there we think about with the movement enablers is what resources are going to be needed to start and sustain the movement. Like getting real, what do we need? How much money do we need? What kind of money? How do we get that money? Who do we get that money from? So the fact that everybody's here is a cohort of the Climate Action Fund shows that this has been considered, of course, as people here would have applied for grant funding to be part of this program here. So these conversations clearly have happened within the movements, but this is another thing that we do look to cover and explore. Obviously what we'll do here now, and when we look to explore these with other groups that we work with as well. So what models can provide sustainable funding on an ongoing basis, and that might be that some projects or movements will work through. We will apply for grant funding, and that's all to sustain. Some groups and projects, it is suitable to get donations into their organisation, into their projects from individual giving, or looking for corporate donations or whatever it might be. There's all sorts of different models. If you provide some sort of service and you're a service provision organisation or charity, and that sits within your movement as such, but you can fund and sustain some of that through obtaining contracts, to provide and deliver your service. There's all sorts of models that could be sustainable to fund you on an ongoing basis. But yeah, just having that clarity on what that would be, and think about, the immediate funding, and think about that longer term funding as well. But there's all sorts of different things. Yeah, could be. And just looking at a slide to see if I've missed anything. I covered most of that, but yeah, commerce, fundraising. There's all sorts of things that people will do to sustain their movements, their organizations, their projects. So again, it's one of the other things that we'll look to really dig into a bit. And by doing so, we then have a clear understanding of the 4 key things that we believe will ensure you can enable your movement and sustain and strengthen your movement, and really strengthen that movement identity, and allow the movement journey to happen. There's no movement journey. There's no clear movement journey without good understanding of who's in your movement. And that's one thing about understanding your people, but then it goes back to, your CRM, your data, whether they can self-organize, who I'm sending certain communications to, these things all tie in together. And that, I guess, is why we felt for this particular training program, it was really important to sign up for all 3 of the workshops and be able to commit to all 3 of those workshops. So, by the end of that, you can link in all these varying different elements, and we can then, actually determine some good next steps. So we just, I definitely personally felt that if it was, be able to choose which ones, if you were to go to workshop, two out of 3, then your canvas may not align, and we believe there'd be elements of a healthy movement ecosystem that you've not been able to consider. So that's why we'd ask, obviously circumstances change and things come up, but we'd ask with the best intention that if you were to sign up, you'd be able to attend all 3 sessions of this training program. So very briefly, as I'm running out of breath, what happened next? We will analyse the answers to our survey questions and determine the most suitable frequency and dates for the programme. We've had a good range there and something we could work with there already, but we'll keep it open till the end of this week just to allow the recording to get around and any more people to watch this and see if they have going to give some input there. So we'll be in contact then with the dates of the full training program as soon as possible. If we get the information back at the end of this week, we'll basically make the determination straight away based on those results and get the information sent out to the cohort. There'll be separate sign-up forms for the full training program. And then, we'll send out a physical copy of the movement building canvas to the lead contacts, which, you'll identify who those be through the sign-up form. And then we'll start to build our movements. And that will be the movement building canvas training program in a nutshell. So, drink some water in a second. Any questions, please do get in touch. And like I say, contact me at tyrone@thesocialchangeagency.org. You can write that down now. It is on the flyer that we've sent out as well. So please do get in touch with any questions. If you do have questions for Climate Outreach and their training program, which sounds great, and hopefully people will be able to attend, then please do get in touch with David Powell. And I'll just take one question from the chat here if there's time. That's a good question there, so thank you. Around multiple partners within a project. Sort of the members for each, how many members from each project could look to attend. So whilst I did put sort of prior that we're looking to try and have 2 maximum from each project, these are the very things that I think would be very good to get in contact with, so we could look to determine the best way that we could still ensure that, you know, the projects have multiple partners can engage best with their program. So good question, and we want to ensure that partners would be able to attend. So I would not look to restrict that if possible, and will please do get in touch if you have your particular project. There's complications around potentially just having a couple attending, and we'll see what can be worked out, and we'll find a solution. The most important thing is that we have this training accessible for the cohort, that you're able to engage and you'll be able to get the best out of it. So we will determine a solution, and please, just drop me an email with this, and we'll figure something out. But that's all there. I will end the webinar a touch early, not as early as I thought actually, so I'm not giving much time. Oh yes, and the question here as well, we will be repeating the program next year, so the plan is to run this program for the end of this year, have an alumni session from this in February to reconvene and check progress and just get a chance to, you know, share stories and challenges and successes. And then, yes, we would look to run the program again following that for anybody who couldn't attend running up to the summer of 23. So absolutely looking to run this program twice. So not going to be the last chance at all. Brilliant. Well, if you do have any further questions, please do get in touch. And if you have questions about the Climate Outreach Programme, either contact David, or if you do contact me, I will forward to David and he'll be able to get in touch. But yeah, thank you very much for attending, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you.